Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Hazel, I work in the marketing team here at Rullion, and I have the pleasure of being your pilot today, and I'll be facilitating our conversation. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on demand. So if you do need to leave the call at any point, you won't miss out, as we'll send you the recording link afterwards. Today, we're diving into something that's top of mind for many leaders, how to tackle critical skills gaps and build future-proof teams. Such a big challenge, isn't it? But luckily, we have some genuine experts ready to share all their knowledge with us. We have two fantastic speakers. Dan, trained to deploy director at Rullion. Give us a wave, Dan, in case there was any doubt who you are. Dan has spent years developing bespoke upskilling solutions that help organizations navigate their workforce challenges. And we have Xanthi. Xanthi, wave at us. Group CEO at Hatch Digital. Hatch is one of Rullion's training providers, and they specialize in upskilling for digital and tech skills. Both our speakers dedicate their careers to advocating for underrepresented groups, and they share the belief that shifting from CVs to potential is the key to building high-performing teams. This is very conversational and practical session, so please don't hold back on your questions. Just put them into the chat and I'll make sure that they are included. And I think that's enough from me. I'm going to be quiet. I think we should get started. Dan, do you want to kick us off?
Came off mute, guys. Apologies for that. Yeah, thanks, Hazel, and good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for joining us today. As Hazel says, I know how busy it is. This is a lunchtime period, but so I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. It certainly helps me not being in 34 degrees London heat today. I wouldn't have fancied that one, to be honest. So it's just good to be here. So as Hazel said, my name's Dan. I lead the Train to Deploy business here at Rullion. I joined with a bit of a clear mission in terms of what I wanted to achieve, and it was to build sustainable, future-ready workforces. I guess not just scrambling to fill vacancies. So let's just get started and look at things in more detail, if you don't mind, Hazel. So look, we're not here to pretend the skills shortages aren't real. In many industries, it's been the buzzword, and from energy to tech to water, they've been absolutely justified by the complexity and pace of change in the roles themselves. But we also think it's time to kind of flip the script a little bit, because while everyone's shouting skills crisis or skills shortages, we kind of want to ask, is it really a skills shortage, or are we potentially looking in the wrong places? So that can come down to anything really. Are we too rigid in how we define talent? Are we maybe too stuck in traditional recruitment models that filter out great people in too early? And I think that's where Train to Deploy comes in. We work consultatively with our clients to spot potential, to build capability, to embed the talent that's trained specifically for your world. And I want today to be kind of like an honest conversation, fresh thinking, and looking at how we can shift from reacting to the now to planning for the next. The big question, kind of why now? I think today's session is called 2030 Call, is asking why you didn't upskill sooner. That's not just a catchy title that I may or may not have developed after a few glasses of wine. It's a real provocation and also mimics my experiences of the last few months that I can see it's happening right in front of me. We simply aren't moving quick enough in the majority of the people and companies that I've spoken to. I think 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 are deemed to be not invented yet, which sounds a bit crazy. I thought they'd be flying cars by 2030, but that sounds just as bad. And I've heard a lot of people actually say that let's hold off on doing anything major or any change, because if that's the case, then why would we want to do it now? For me, it's the complete opposite to that. It's more about the fact you'll need a bit of a working factory belt that's kind of 2-3 years operationally sound by that point to withstand that depth of change in what is now only kind of 4.5 years away. So for me, that's crucial. And in terms of the kind of why now, I suppose it's quite simple. The truth is the signal's already here. As we are seeing rising attrition, shrinking talent pools, spiraling hiring costs, yet we try to keep solving tomorrow's problems with yesterday's kind of hiring logic. So we created the session to challenge that thinking, offer you a different way forward, one that builds capability before the crisis hits. And most importantly, we've created a solution that's scalable, inclusive, and outcome driven. So apart from the horrible fashion sense of the individuals on the screen, the big question is why now? I've worked in upskilling people development for years now, and when speaking to my clients, it's certainly not that they're ever dismissive of this. I rarely ever go into a client meeting and they say, look, nah, it's not for us. I don't think it's a problem. Move on to something else or don't sell to me. It's more the case that there's usually a bigger priority. It's almost been like, I've said this a few times, it's almost been a bit of a luxury item. It's never like a no, this isn't for us, it won't work. It's more a case of, let's just park this for now. And that's kind of a big point on it. I think on the screen, I've listed a few of the common pieces of what we'd call feedback that I've had. Almost highlighted from the amber flags of where they're fully aware, watching this happen, through to what will soon be red flags. So the standouts that I would highlight there are, we will look at it in the next financial year. This is often where they believe it's going to take a large investment to make a big switch here, something we will come on to later. Or the second one, which is let's fill the role and let's talk about that early next year. That does happen quite a lot. I think it creates a cycle of kind of repeat hiring, reactive fixes. It recognizes the problem but postpones the solution. And I think that's where sometimes it feels like the luxury item I mentioned, maybe easy to kind of kick the can and discussion down the road for another day. And it's tricky, I get it. This is obvious to us. We're on the recruitment side of the table, and our clients are not working in recruitment. They are doing their day jobs. They are delivering operational pressures. They have stuff that we don't always know about, pressures day to day. So I think it's very easy to kind of look past that and focus on what's needed, which is a long-term investment. So we're hearing a lot about the skills shortages, and I want to challenge that today. I think it's not just about the skills that don't exist. It's that we're not set up to access them. We're relying on CVs, experience checklists, often outdated models that rule out great people too early. Meanwhile, we're actually rehiring for the same roles again and again because we're not capable enough underneath. And then obviously you've got your retirements, which are accelerating, and the labor market is tightening, but we're still fishing in that kind of same shallow pool. So for me, yeah, the summary, I guess, on this one is that it isn't a pipeline problem. It's more of a planning problem. And that's why this conversation really matters. Thanks, Hazel. And I put some big scary numbers on the screen because I thought that's what's going to attract everyone at lunchtime. But I mentioned on the last slide that I think it can be hard to get someone who's under huge operational pressures, to start thinking differently. It's always very easy to stick to what you know, even if that means paying for that talent and then accepting higher retention as part of the course when it's a candidate-led market. So the way I see this is, and kind of taking a few key standouts, is that when we delay, we pay. Salaries for in-demand technical roles are rising fast, 15 to 25% in the last 2 years. And as that retirement cliff edge continues, especially for a lot of Rullion's clients in critical infrastructure, less people are entering these sectors or fields, qualifying, and that really won't decrease unless there's a major transformation coming from the education system, which is probably still feels light years away. So that drives the need for this last minute hiring, and that can obviously start to drive up to kind of 40% increases on rates or salaries. One other standout from that screen, I would say organizations that wait 2 years to rethink their workforce strategies face double the cost in future reskilling and short-term hiring. I think that's probably quite evident because you're going to be jumping into a packed market of people trying to react at last minute when there's a lot of proactive companies that are going to be probably 2-3 years more advanced. Even breaking it down to recruiter level, day to day, number to number, I think a key vacancy left open for 1 month can be costly in terms of productivity, never mind harder to document detail around impact on work quality, impact on team members who are picking up the slack, that kind of burden. It's easy to see when you've got critical roles, which are 5, 6, 7, 800 pounds per day. It's quite atypical. And then I would just say, lastly, that kind of 10% dip in retention, it can shrink annual revenue by up to 6%. And look, everyone's seen stats online, everyone's read documents, white papers. Stats and insights can be subjective. They're widely cited with variables. But with this, it comes with any justified weight, and this is powerful for businesses to know that that's the impact of retention. I think it's quite a big thing to stand out. And just really to conclude on the kind of cost of wait, and I think, as mentioned throughout, companies can currently pay their way out of trouble. That's happening. That's going to continue to happen for another few years. It'll fill a short-term gap. It'll ease those operational pressures, but we cannot keep sleeping on the impact of what's going to be a growing problem with retention. So these numbers are just, yeah, they're eyebrow raising, but for me, they're also unnecessary because the potential and talent is out there. The capability is buildable. I guess we're just not making those moves soon enough. And that's where yours truly comes into play. Set up the business. How does it all work? Well, just to keep it quite simple, we match first, then we train after. So we assess candidates for behaviors, their values, their potential before training them. So ensuring the right fit from day one. So someone must demonstrate like learning agility, resilience, that kind of flexibility to work in a new role or a new sector. We want them to have a mindset that they're not just coming in to work for a client to fill a short-term gap and take a job. That's where the model would fail. This is more about them and us wanting to build a career there. That's how this model operates. So how do we do that? It's about a tailored pathway. So every program is built around your specific skills requirements. No off-the-shelf solutions. You won't come to me with a skills need, and I won't have to go away and check the catalog and say, no, that skill's not in there. We can't support you with it. Instead, we will look at what your skills are, what your minimum skills needs are, experience levels, and we'll then go away and create a solution for you. So that's been a really positive model for us. One real standout that's becoming more and more of a conversation is, and probably generating more interest in this model, is that customization is actually ideal for many roles which just keep changing and changing, especially impacted by tech or AI changes, where quarter 1 2025 is going to look very different to quarter 1 2026, and so on and so on. So I guess what I'm saying is we don't want to just upskill them, pass them over to the client, and then say, cheerio. Instead, it's going to be more about we place the candidates. We then, throughout their life cycle, they are then supported by my team. We have engagement managers who will be checking in with both the worker, which actually aids the hiring manager from a productivity perspective, because my team would pick up a lot of the people management, performance management. But whilst those dialogues are happening, that engagement manager is also speaking to the hiring manager and understanding, like, is there any changes to this role, this position, this job description? And that actually allows us to then go, do you know what? What we can do is we can look at some impending kind of top-up needs. So we've upskilled them on day one and they've started, which is fantastic. But maybe in 12 months' time, that's where the model really grows. And that's where we then turn around and go, right, Mr. Hiring, Mrs. Hiring Manager, we can be in a position where if you've changed new tools, processes, or ideas, we'll get into a position whereby we can actually support you with that. Our talent is pre-qualified. They're upskilled. They're ready to contribute from immediately to critical projects. And a big passion for me is we are driving social value as we do so. So social value and diversity has been thrown into too many political type discussions in the last 12 months, which of course I'm not going to mention today. But you strip that right back. This isn't about quotas or being asked for how much of a commitment you have in a bid or a tender. This is more about we champion underrepresented talent through this model. I work with lots of like ex-forces, career changers, ex-athletes, NEET candidates, ethnic minorities. Where our clients are open to kind of lowering this barrier to entry, it means we're focusing on the training provider being the core function here, and we just match them to people that want an opportunity. So yeah, diversity is a hot topic, but speaking frankly, taking stacks and reporting out of the equation, simply put, if you're targeting a more broad talent pool, whether it's if you were in the area of Manchester and it was 1,000 candidates and we changed the process, which means we can consider another 10,000 people, naturally you're going to get more diverse candidates, which comes with innovation, better decision making, problem solving. And there's plenty of research that says that companies with top quartile of diversity are going to be better performing financially, which, I mean, most board members are going to be excited to hear that. So I'll conclude on this slide by saying critical to this approach, and I didn't just deliberately miss out point 3 in case anyone's really on it today, was our trusted network of partners. I think perhaps rather than when I was building this model, I had two choices. I could have built out a small catalog of courses, or I could focus on giving our clients real support on what they needed. So with that, my model was about building it as many skills as possible, building relationships with experts in their field, people that have worked in the industry for 20, 30 years, partners who have worked and developed training companies. And that's where we are working with Xanthi and Hatch today, joining us. It could be them, our partner in digital. It could be National Training Academy for Rail, one of our partners in rail. We've got partners in nuclear fusion. We work closely with purpose-led organizations like STEM returners or in the green skill sector. We're constantly building out our training partnerships so that when a client is in need, we're on the front foot, and more often than not, we can say yes. So that leads me today to take my dulcet Irish tones away and pass over to Hatch. Hatch, really great partner. They provide a similar solution to what we do, and sometimes that can shut down a collaboration. But they're a specialist in digital, And that doesn't stop me collaborating. Instead, it makes us come together and give us the best client solution. So I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes. Everyone be happy. And pass over to Xanthi, who will do a much better job of explaining it all to me.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I thoroughly enjoyed your dulcet tones, Dan. So thank you. And thank you guys both actually for having me on to speak, because you know I love talking about this stuff. So I'll try and keep it brief. It's also really lovely to see some familiar names on today. So I will look forward to the Q&A later on. But about Hatch Digital. So I've been with Hatch for about 5 years now. I was definitely originally drawn in by our mission, which is to tackle the digital skills shortage, quite simply by valuing people for their potential rather than just their experience. And by that, I mean really what's on their CV. Our goal is also a pretty simple one. We want to get out into the market, find untapped and underserved talent, often from the most underrepresented communities, and then train them into the tech and digital roles that our clients need most and they're struggling to fill. In terms of the how we do what we do, I think our model stands out in sort of two really differentiated ways versus traditional hiring. Firstly, it is very inclusive by design. We don't ever ask candidates for CVs when we're not actually overly interested in people's previous experience or to some degree, even their educational background beyond a certain level. Instead of all that, we use as our pre-qualification methods a blend of kind of assessment tooling and face-to-face screening that really shine a light on people for their, I mean, on the basis of their transferable skills and their kind of real tangible potential. So we're focusing much more on what someone could become and how we can lean in and our partners can lean in to best unlock that, rather than where they've been or the opportunities they haven't had. In terms of finding the people we serve as well, the candidates that we bring into our process, we stay away from recruiter channels like jobs boards because, to be quite frank, active job seekers in tech, they have enough people looking after them already. So we're out there running blended, very, very targeted community level campaigns, kind of on the ground in local areas, for example, through charity partners, so that we can engage the people who are genuinely hardest to reach and kind of the most overlooked when it comes to recruitment into tech. This second sort of differentiating component of the model, outside of kind of the inclusive front end, is, as Dan mentioned earlier, it's all about customized training. We simply do not do generic off-the-shelf pathways. We do quite often get asked, but we don't do them. We work with clients instead to kind of define exactly, you know, what does good look like in your business? What does it mean? What does it mean to be productive from day one? And then we design the training backwards from that. So the focus is entirely on kind of trainer-led contextualized learning and the practical application of skills, rather than what you so often see as just kind of classroom-based skill theory working towards an off-the-shelf industry certification. Because it's not about getting people ready for those kind of hypothetical environments. It's about getting people sort of truly productive, feeling comfortable delivering in their new role and sort of contributing autonomously, so they're not drawing down on existing kind of teams' time, and you know, actually delivering on real billable projects in as little as 8 to 12 weeks. So that's why we've gone down the sort of heavily customized versus generic training route. And if you pull both of those components of our model together, I suppose what we're giving our clients is the ability to build very tailored talent pipelines that meet their skills needs, but also their very specific diversity goals. So for example, if you had a consistent need for in-house software developers, or you had a consistent need for security cleared IT support staff to service government contracts, or you know, whatever the case may be. And by the way, you'd like them to be women or veterans or career returners or older workers or from global majority or ethnic minority backgrounds, because those are the groups that are underrepresented in your specific workforce. Then you can build that pipeline based on those needs. And the social value, as Dan spoke about earlier, is just so thoroughly baked into that you can't separate the two. So there are sort of commercial and social reasons to get behind these interventions as well. I will stop there before I continue to rabbit on, because I could talk for much longer. But I'm excited to get to the Q&A, so Dan, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, again, great to have you. It's always a pleasure. I think she kind of covered it there herself, but I was one of the first times I had a chance to work with Hatch. It was from our earlier conversations, and what stood out immediately was what she kind of discussed there with regards to kind of the bespoke aspect of it. I think I was very much used to trying to, if a client had a need for a software engineer, and it would usually take 12 weeks, so I had the majority of training providers in the market. And that's what their curriculum was. It was very much, here you go, client, how do you feel about this? And they would say yes or no, that suits. I think the difference was, so they wanted to sit down and come into the conversation with the client. And rather than that kind of fixed response, we actually had a conversation, which was very much a case of saying, right, what exactly do you need? What skills within that software engineer remit do you and do you not need? What sort of ones do you not rate? And you think that it potentially it's education for the sake of education. And then all of a sudden we were working with a 8 to 9 week pathway, which made things kind of a lot easier with regards to kind of building out. So yeah, just want to conclude with that one. And I will move on myself to kind of demything everything, if possible, around the whole train to deploy piece, because train to deploy has many names: train to deploy, hire train to deploy. I think that doesn't help things, but let me kind of go through them and sort of cover where I see the the opportunities to do so. And I think the first one would really be the cost. I think one of the biggest assumptions is that building talent from scratch is expensive. In reality, I would say customized training is often more cost effective because you're only paying for what is exactly needed if done correctly. You're not wasting budget on generic modules or irrelevant content. You are building capability aligns with real job requirements. You're reducing onboarding time. You're increasing productivity from day one. And then you've got the cost that comes with unfilled roles, attrition pain points that the hiring manager or is facing. And that adds to what I shared earlier in terms of that cost of waiting. The second myth that we talk about is the kind of bench model. Again, coming to Rullion, decision was, do we go with a bench model? Do we go with a more bespoke model? And the latter was the choice. I think a misconception around most or all trained to deploy providers is that we operate with a bench, a pool of pre-trained candidates that are ready to be placed. And my team will be trying to get them into our clients where possible. That's not how we work. At Rullion, we're not just selling people, we're kind of building partnerships. I think we don't hold a bench of people waiting to be placed. Instead, we act as an extension of your hiring practice, identifying candidates who are the right fit for your business, not just technically, I guess, but behaviorally and values-led for your organization. But it's also important that they have to be right for you, that they are right, that you are right for them as well. That's equally important in this type of model, because if we're to invest in someone and upskill them and they join the client and it's just a bad match, we have obviously invested in them, which naturally doesn't seem like it will be a good fit, and it would end up being a bit of a tricky one. But also it supports the long-term retention, especially with our model, because we make it easy. We do not penalize you to make your placement permanent at the end of the kind of minimum duration. The way I've looked at it is, let's face it, you've trusted us, you've trusted them, you've invested in their development. I don't want to then turn around and go, that's going to be an expensive hire to convert. So that's the second piece. And then I would say moving on to the third, which is the relevance of the training. There's often an assumption that training is generic, only certain skills, but when it's done right, like we do in partnership with Hatch, training is tailored to your exact environment. So clients will sometimes think that certain skills maybe are like too advanced for this type of model, but the world of training has advanced so much since COVID that I would say that at least have a conversation with me and understand the art of the possible, because your systems, your processes, your tools, even the language you use every day, there are aspects that we can consider when building on your learning pathway. And the result, candidates will be able to hit the ground running because they're not just trained, they're prepared for your world of work, your site, your office, all positives when it comes to retention. And then I would just say, to conclude on that, I think it's time now. I would just say it time to stop waiting, really, for these perfect candidates to appear. And I know that sounds quite cheesy and it's quite a corny phrase, but the reality is we need to start building them. Upskilling them kind of gives us more of a smarter, faster, more inclusive way to solve these long-term skill challenges. So while others are fighting over the same talent pool, we help grow your own. And as a takeaway, I would just say, I'd ask yourself really, like, how do you know your competitors aren't already building their pipelines whilst we're kind of in a position where we're watching and waiting? I think let's start to think about how we can start getting ahead before you're probably playing catch up. Myself.
Okay. I think, so I've got my printed list here of some of the great questions submitted when people registered for the webinar. Before I get to those, I'm going to kick us off with a bit of a cheeky planted question to warm us all up. So Xanthi, Dan, you've both worked with clients who have been hesitant to change. They've been hesitant to move away from their current practices and maybe bring in a change of deploy model. What finally shifted their mindset? And you can rattle it out between yourselves. Who wants to go? Xanthi, go on.
I'll take first dibs. I think it's a really good question. And there are lots of reasons, but I think probably the two I see most often is this kind of coming together of the head and the heart that these kind of interventions offer. I think what really shifts the mindset for most clients is realizing that they don't have to choose between the two. They've got the kind of human stories through the inclusiveness of the delivery, so the real genuine social impact, the kind of individual lives that are being transformed through approaches like these. And then on the other, you've got just the incredibly clear commercial drivers in today's hiring market, especially in tech. So faster hiring, lower costs, more sustainable talent strategy overall for the long term. As Dan mentioned, your competitors are probably already doing it. Reduce reliance on costly resources who've been through generic training. The list is relatively endless. And I think when you can bring those two together in a really tangible way, that's quite a light bulb moment. So yeah, we're seeing that light bulb turn on faster and faster as well. I had a client who said the other day that they were at about 10 grand looking for an entry to mid-level software engineer, and they were 2.5 months into the process. And they were just upping the salary. So I don't think it's massively surprising that businesses are being quite proactive now at looking at a better way of doing things, and definitely embracing that mindset shift a bit more openly.
Dan, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just say, apologies, the good question from my perspective, I think for the procurement heroes on the call or listening back, which is to use kind of a pilot or a trial route. I think small numbers, pilots that can often be done under threshold limits via discretionary budget, speeding up the process, often via kind of existing MSP agreements. I think from a concept perspective, it's about dispelling those myths in small quantities. If we're bringing someone into your team, see how they perform, see they engage with your team. As a reminder, we take on the risk as an organization at Rullion. We get the person to that necessary level. So if they don't hit the ground running, it's on us to manage their redeployment or further training. So the kind of, from a client perspective, we're removing all those risks and commercial kind of penalties that would come with it. It wouldn't be overly sustainable if we had a problem with that. Instead, very quickly, what usually happens is the client sees someone thriving, and it becomes a positive news story, which naturally multiplies internally, because one hiring manager hears about something where someone's working differently and it's working and it's cost effective. Very quickly, you have a lot less people who are a lot less reluctant to do it in the same way. So one hiring manager I used to have probably 4 or 5 years back now, he used to bring in 2 to 3 people into what was quite a long high tenure digital team, and he very much brought them in every single year. 1, to fill jobs because he really liked the model, but 2, because it actually helped with his tenure, because there was people that were in that business for 15, 20 years working in the same way, very comfortable, and all of a sudden he had freshly upskilled kind of graduates, career changers that were thinking differently, that were more inquisitive, challenging the status quo, as it started to make them up their game a little bit as a byproduct, which was really good. And then alongside that, probably more so from a procurement perspective, I think it's just to identify the budget holder or the senior managers who are in that decision-making position, who's feeling that pain or who can champion the business case. I think a strong internal sponsor is very important with regards to train to deploy. They can push procurement sort of to act faster or route through a bit of an exceptions process.
You've both there spoke about how teams and skills and the requirements are not always the same. And that links really nicely into one of the questions that we've received. I work at a utility organisation, and our 2 most repeated roles are very different: technicians and data analyst roles. Which overlooked communities or demographics could be the future of our workforce, and why do you think they're not being prioritised? Do you need me to repeat it? Did you catch the beginning of it?
No, I got the beginning. That's okay. Dan, why don't we switch up the order? You take this one first.
I'll take this one. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it probably all comes back to, I think from a technician perspective, obviously it's something I deal with quite regularly. I've done a lot of work with clients in the rail and utility sector with regards to technician roles. I think it all comes down to the client openness again. I think, are you willing to sit down and look at your job descriptions, kind of like what is, I suppose, what is truly the minimum skill set they would need to get to? I think what's essential, what's on there because it's been on that job description for 10, 15 years. I also get it. That's what you want. That's what served you well. That's the success factor. But we're here and we're talking about this because there's a growing issue. So my question is then, how open are you thinking outside the box? And I'll take an example. We have some fantastic clients in the rail space. They fully understand that the technician pools are smaller than before. They are in a position where they would be able to share with me minimum criteria that someone must have. And immediately I was able to go away and find a training partner, which then allowed me to fill the gaps and immediately start looking at a much broader background of people. So people with transferable skills outside of rail, perhaps people who have recently exited the military, garage mechanics, persons in construction, healthcare, aviation, or on the wilder side of things, lift engineers, if that's wild, or hear me out, theme park, maintenance crews. Yes, really, especially those in certain industries where there maybe is a larger job risk because those markets have changed completely. There's not a long-term kind of job in certain sectors nowadays. It's a real great story for those clients. If I am a client that's operating that type of model and we're struggling to bring people into, let's say, rail, and all of a sudden you have a solution which brings new talent into the industry, I think it comes with massive plus points alongside kind of what is filling a day-to-day role as well.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think coming at it, I keep going back to the word mindset, which I'm conscious was the original question that was posed a minute ago, but I think it applies to this as well. I think beyond the practical, and that certainly plays a role, the key to all of this, I think, does sit in removing this fixed idea of the type of person that you expect in those roles. It doesn't really matter whether it's technicians or analysts or, you know, a whole host of other roles cross industry. I think it's getting away, as Dan mentioned, kind of from those backgrounds you listed, from the idea that a certain role equates to a certain background or a certain set of skills or a certain set of experiences. Because in my experience, I think people's potential doesn't come in that kind of prepackaged, predictable format. And then it becomes, you know, and I completely appreciate that organizations have diversity agendas and you know, ambitions aligned to certain demographics. But if you get that mindset shift right, then it becomes less a kind of ticking off exercise from the demographic checklist. And it becomes more about, okay, how am I going to redesign and rewire my hiring and upskilling and reskilling processes to actually penetrate those communities, find, unlock, empower those individuals through opportunity into my business. And you know, that's, I think, where organizations are slightly falling short, is there's a lot of good chat. They're talking a good game, but I don't think they're actually changing the way they look for talent, and it has to be really intentional. It can be very uncomfortable shifting away from processes you've been reliant on for some time, but you know, it is absolutely worth doing. I think when you see the quality of the candidates that come through, you know, different, less traditional routes.
Santhi, I'm going to stick with you because we've got a question here. It's quite a long one, but it fits really nicely into what you were just saying. So the person's here written, we often have hiring managers fearful of taking someone inexperienced due to how much time they'll need to commit. What kind of support does someone actually, and that's underlined and italicized, that what does someone actually need to become productive quickly versus what we assume they need? So it talks that perception piece again, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And this comes up all the time because it's probably the most practical element of especially these types of models, or you know, where you're talking about volume-based hiring. Then it's not necessarily huge volumes, but it's definitely a consideration. So it's a completely fair one. You don't want to overload your teams, right? When people land in the business, and I think there's a fear of that kind of hand-holding period because of generic training, which we've already mentioned we do not do as a group. But I think because of experiences with generic training and relatively generic skill sets entering the business through these non-traditional paths, I think companies are worried about having to offset that with these endless hand-holding periods. But I think what people need to become productive is actually quite simple. It's clarity, it's context, and it's the right kind of support. And it's that doesn't equate to hours and hours of anything at all. It's actually quite minimal in terms of the amount of intervention. I think clarity, you know, in terms of the role and the expectation from them coming out of the training is that starts in the solution design when you're getting into the hiring managers, you know, understanding their pain points about where skills and competencies that are on the job description aren't being matched. And, you know, you set the expectations from both sides at the start of the journey. So that's the clarity piece. I think from a, you know, from a contextualization point of view, you know, you're simulating client environments through the training. You're having them learn to apply skills within the tech stack they're going to be working in. You might even simulate projects that they might be working on one day. It depends on the type of work they're going to be doing. So it's not generic theory. It's them arriving and landing familiar with your tools, your platforms, your processes, your ways of working, even some of the team members in some instances. And then that final bit, which I think is the bit everybody worries about the most, the kind of hand holding is just a bit of structured onboarding. It's just the extension of the process you would already use for new hires. And a lot of that they'll have been immersed in, you know, during the training period anyway. So I think a little bit would go a long way. It does go a long way. And typically, you know, these people are up and running post training, and they're pretty autonomous by the end of that 12-week period. So less disruptive than people would assume would be my kind of one message from that, which I've said in a very long-winded way.
Dan, we've spoken about that as well, haven't we? Like people being ready from day one, and it's not a myth at all. I'm just going to remind everyone that you can put any questions in your chat as well as we work our way through the ones that people have submitted to us previously. This is a good one. So I think, Dan, this is probably one for you. In fact, they've called you out specifically. So what have you done? You talk about hiring managers thinking differently or job descriptions being adapted. If you took the average job spec for a critical role and stripped away brand and organizational bias, degree requirements, years of experience, etc., how many more people could do that job?
Well, not the first time I've been called out, so we'll address that first, the important aspects. No, I think I would just say, look, train to deploy for me is the future. It's a great option. Everyone can have their opinions on it. I think I can't see a way forward, which with the current education system and infrastructure around the future skills, I don't see how we're coming to any quick movements unless it goes through a model such as this. But of course, I'm not also ignorant to know that there are many jobs out there. We work with clients in the likes of nuclear, fusion, etc., where some of the skills are incredibly advanced. There are multiple barriers, experience and certifications and qualifications and policy that maybe means that certain roles cannot go through this. So I'm not ignorant enough to say this is for everything, but it's still very relevant for the majority of roles that we look at. So to answer the question, a lot more than we think. I would say that, in fact, in some roles, we believe the talent pool could be probably double or even triple. Even small tweaks to that job description can have huge impact. I think when you look to remove like artificial filters, and I say artificial with the best will, and there's certain things, degree and requirements that aren't truly essential now. We've seen it in talent development, HR type roles. There are certain jobs in recruitment I've seen on there. It says preference is degree essential, and that is the sort of thing we're talking about here, or 5 years experience that becomes kind of copy and paste fluff. So you start to uncover people with the right behaviors, aptitude and potential who were previously invisible to the system. And that issue probably isn't that talent doesn't exist, as we spoke about at the beginning. I do actually think there is a skills abundance. It's that we're screening people out before they even get a look in. We've kind of proven through trying to deploy that when you flip the model, start with potential, build skills through more targeted training, you open up the role to an entirely different talent pool. And often these individuals, they're more engaged, they're more diverse, they're more loyal because they've been given a chance that they wouldn't have got through a traditional CV shift. So it sounds silly, but they do feel that appreciation, and that naturally feeds through in retention and loyalty. So the real question, I suppose, is where is the talent? The real question is probably, where's the talent? And I'm thinking to myself, what are we actually doing, or what's stopping that talent from getting through the door? Because it's a real extremity. I appreciate, but I'll always say that if you're filling struggling to fill a role, yet your job description still asks for a degree, 10 years experience, and immediate availability, you're not always hiring, you're hoping. So yeah, it's many more people would be the answer, I would say, Hazel.
Xanthi, is there anything that you'd add to that? Oh no, Xanthi, you're on mute. There it is. We've done the mute bingo.
It had to be somebody, didn't it? Do you know what? As Dan was speaking, I was like, oh, if I get brought into this, I must remember to unmute myself. I did not. And now I've completely lost my train of thought. Will you remind me of the question at the beginning, Hazel?
Yeah, of course. So Dan talks about, and I've called you out again, sorry mate. Dan talks about hiring managers thinking differently or job descriptions being adapted. If you took the average job spec for a critical role and you stripped everything out, your brand, years of experience, how many more people could be doing those jobs?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's endless. I completely agree with Dan. I think, you know, it's so limiting. And I think the more tech in its own, I think, is an exacerbated version of this. So I'll kind of operate within my own frame of reference and talk about that. But what we're seeing in response to kind of desperation for hiring as the talent pool gets shorter and more restricted, as more people require the skills, we're finding the job descriptions are just getting overloaded. People are just piling skills into them in the vain hope that they might find someone with like half of those skills. And they're paying over the odds for, you know, people who actually don't match the job description at all. And that's before you get to kind of just how generally uninclusive that is as a process, to just pile skills into something and expect people to kind of self-identify out of the process. So I think stripping back, you know, as part of the solution design process for training pathways, getting really under that, we always use the job description as the starting point and basically tear it apart in front of them, which is an enjoyable experience, not for them, but for us. And actually, I think it's really eye-opening for them, for clients and for customers to understand just the vast scale that by like every line item on the job description that you remove, just you amplify the audience again and again and again. So again, I completely agree with you, Dan. It comes down to like, it's just thinking about in really raw terms, you know, every kind of extra line that you have in a job description is excluding X number of people. And I think that's quite a sobering thought, and it's worth kind of keeping in mind if you're hiring at the moment.
Yeah, it's some really valuable points you've both made. I've got 2 more questions on my list, and so far I can't see any questions in the chat, and I'm hoping I'm not the only one. I'm hoping that they're not there. They are there, and I can't see them, sort of thing. Anyway, Xanthi, I'm going to stay with you because I think this question really resonates with what Hatch are all about in terms of thinking beyond the CV.
Yeah.
So the question is, my organisation says we want to support social value.
Yeah.
We've heard that plenty of times before, right? My organisation says we want to support social value, but don't know how to do it consistently and sustainably. What's your advice?
I mean, it's fantastic as a starting point to want to support it, because far too often that isn't the case. And I think my advice probably is to just get going, but do it with a kind of thread of intentionality. If that's the word, yes, it is, through it. I think a really good starting point is pick some partners you trust, who are familiar with delivering in the social value space, kind of whose work you genuinely respect and connect with. And I think also who can amplify your brand and your brand's voice and the message into communities that you're probably not reaching and might struggle to reach on your own. I think that's kind of an interesting gauge for a partnership in the social value space. I think doing that will teach you a lot about what you do next. So which initiatives are actually resonating with your workforce, with, you know, with the end customers, which communities are engaging back with your brand and which aren't, and therefore how much meaningful impact are you actually delivering, and therefore where do you go next? So it sort of becomes self-fulfilling. I think the other really obvious point to make is that avoid using social value as kind of a procurement tick box bid driven exercise. It doesn't do anything for anyone. I think if you can get to a point where you're embedding social value practices into your everyday business processes, like hiring, like upskilling, like your supply chain management, and your supply chain decisions, then you're in a really good space. I think that's kind of where it becomes a very powerful tool that gives back to you commercially and becomes a sort of self-fulfilling mechanism whilst driving value in kind of, you know, the communities that you're looking to serve.
Xanthi, I'm gonna keep picking on you because Tracy's written a question that I think links nicely to what you've been saying. So Tracy says many hiring managers really value bringing in diverse talent through social value initiatives, but they're often under pressure to deliver quickly and feel they need candidates with direct experience. How can Train to Deploy support confidence in hiring potential over experience while still meeting delivery goals?
I'm just sort of making sure I've read the question properly. Should I put open under pressure to deliver quick? I mean, look, I think Dan, you and I had a conversation about this only last week. It is these initiatives are designed not to become the sole source of your talent overnight. They're designed to come in alongside your existing processes to relieve pressure on kind of reactive hiring and moving it to a more planned, more proactive space. But there is an indicative lead time in there that it takes to embed these solutions, to get them set up. Train to Deploy works quicker than lots of other models out there, and it de-risks a lot of that kind of upfront investment. But it is, Tracy, I think to your point, it's not and I don't think there is at all. It's not an immediate fix to that feeling under pressure and needing to deliver quickly. Does that, I hope that answers the question. Dan, you've probably got more to add to that.
Yeah, I think with Train to Deploy, what we're seeing already is it's indirectly ticking this box anyway. I think social value comes via Train to Deploy in general. I think one of Tracy's points is valid. It's how do we get that it feels like there is a hand-holding aspect with Train to Deploy. It's like bringing someone in as junior that's not worked in this background before is going to come with a lot of extra rigor. It's on us to kind of do so. I think that's where the transferable thing comes into mind. I don't think it always has to be in a massive immersive training. It can be short training, 2-3 weeks. We work quite closely with our partners in social value. We have partnerships in local communities. For example, we have an event this weekend in the Northeast where we're going to be working with lots of Northeast suppliers. That's where we'd go to if a client, for example, wanted to do a little bit of community social value work in the local area. We would go and reach out to our partners in that space, and they would help us to advertise, to publicize, to bring candidates through the process and put them through what is going to be our training, and that the two feed together into the same result. It's that they're not missing those delivery goals. They're hiring that potential, but they're coming in to hit the ground running. I think that's where the kind of myth still exists, is that everyone is a little bit worried that if they bring someone in via Train to Deploy, they're not going to be ready to contribute from day one. Whereas the model has completely shifted now, where I feel that they are at a much more competent level.
Tracy, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, you can write a follow-up. Philip is taking us into the nitty-gritty. A completely different angle here. Is asked, what tools do you use for skills analysis?
I'm assuming that refers to kind of the front end of the process when we're looking for candidates and we're kind of pre-qualifying them with anything but the CV. So how does Ali actually? We've developed our own kind of assessment methodology, and we build the assessments. They're custom built based on the pathway that we'll be delivering. So we will have a kind of unique understanding, and it's all part of the solution design process. We get in, we understand what they're looking for from a skills perspective and a kind of transferable skills perspective, but actually as importantly, if not more importantly, what's the culture at the business like, and what kind of intrinsic qualities, characteristics, you know, motivations, drivers, what's going to make someone, you know, what kind of shape of person is going to really thrive within the culture of that organization. So we can build all of that into the upfront assessment. And then in terms of actually kind of the skills analysis through the program, the training programs, We predominantly rely on very, very kind of defined learning outcomes that we've pre-agreed with the client upfront, that we use to measure kind of progress through the training, and very kind of comprehensive feedback loops as the training's delivered as well. Again, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I'll add to it, I think, as well. Good question, Philip. I think it's huge for us, obviously, because what centered around the building of my process originally was that I have worked with lots of the underrepresented groups that we have spoken about, and I have noticed how crazy the gap is in terms of how people don't realize that they have so many transferable soft skills that they would never link to another job. And why should they? It's not clear, it's not obvious, it wasn't educated to them, it wasn't given to them by Guardian networks, etc., etc. So I would personally have used a few over the years, Cruncher, without throwing too many names into skills base, etc. But similar to Xanthi, we via the train deploy model, we actually have our own testing, which means that we actually assess them on specific skills, largely soft skills. We look into things like resilience and decision making, teamwork, etc., etc. And that's what's actually part of the social value of the model, is that every candidate that will go through our model, not only will we have that data available to understand where people's learning agility exists. So if someone is a great candidate and they perform really poorly on time management or teamwork or something along those lines, that's not the end of the journey for us. We actually look at that data and that insights, and when we're creating that pathway for them to go into our client, we just build in a few extra days of teamwork, a few extra days of time management, a few extra days of decision making, whatever it may be. We actually help educate them on the soft skills, which means that, again, those people who haven't been supported previously, we have that information to them and we give it to them. And the ones that don't get a job and aren't successful in getting a job, going through our psychometric, our behavior-based testing, we give them the feedback report afterwards. We want them to go away. Too many times in the job market nowadays, it's so hard for recruiters to get it right. Everything goes on LinkedIn. I've applied for 267 jobs and I've been ghosted 195 times. I've seen so many posts like that this year. We want every person that goes through our process to get something, and everyone will get this soft skills, transferable skills feedback report, and they can then go away and work on it. So yeah, you haven't been successful. We've tried our best to find a solution for you, but please take this away and come back to us. We've given you this to go away and develop yourself. Most people that go through a recruitment process effectively, but unfortunately, due to timings, do not get that kind of feedback. So yeah, that's probably my addition to that.
Thanks both. I have one more question on my list if we've still got time, and this is everyone's kind of like last chance to ask your questions and get a live answer. Okay, so what would happen if companies stopped competing for the same handful of oven-ready candidates and instead invested in building talent? How do I articulate this to my boss and their boss and my boss's boss's boss? It's a lot of managers involved in that process.
There's a lot of bosses there. It's been called out and someone's got multiple bosses. It's not a good start. I'll take that one if that's okay. And if you want to add on anything, there's nothing you can do. I guess not everyone walks in oven ready. I think, and we've had this conversation with some of my clients, some on the call today, potentially. Oven ready as a term even is interesting. So I enjoyed that one, but sometimes you've got to preheat the talent. So yeah, that's the last corny line. I think if companies stop compromising and chasing the oven ready talent, we finally break the cycle of inflated salaries, talent shortages, endless open vacancies. I think by building the talent through models like train to deploy, upskilling, we create a sustainable pipeline of people who are loyal, skilled, they're shaped to fit our business needs. I think to articulate this upwards to your boss and your boss, I would say frame it as a bit of a like business resilience strategy and say, like, right now we are renting talent at a premium. It's not working. What if we invested in growing our own faster and smarter than our competitors? And you can also appeal to the bottom line and say reduced agency costs, attrition costs, faster time to hire, more diverse, behaviorally strong hires, and a reputation boost by your investing in social mobility and skills. So I think for me, yeah, ultimately it's not just the hiring solution, it's future-proofing strategy. We can keep fighting over the same talent, or we can make our own. It doesn't stop there. This needs to be sector industry wide. I've had this conversation at a recent industry event where I feel that some clients are a little bit fearful of investing into someone because they always say to me, what if I invest in that time and pay a rate for someone to come in and invest in their journey and then they leave and go to our competitors? Well, firstly, that's a fair question. Our model, though, is designed, going back to Philip's question, is designed to bring in people who want that long-term opportunity. We know that via their skills analysis. We get that protection. People nowadays, they're a bit anxious. They want the economy, COVID, it's really changed people's behaviors. They want long-term assurance, protection. So there are people out there that want that long-term vehicle. But I think if we all think like this, the sector doesn't change. If that client thinks that somebody else is going to get that person off them a year later after they've done all investment, nothing's going to change because we'll always be looking over our shoulder. Instead, I think I'm pushing for all HR recruitment companies to be talking to their clients in these industries and actually getting them all to collectively buy in, because otherwise the sector will constantly, it'll be a constant like pinching exercise where the best talent just rotates to the best offer. So instead, I would just say, don't worry, all companies start bringing in new talent into the industry. Yes, one day they leave you after a year or two. That's going to happen. But if all companies are investing in this method, at least it means that the salaries and the rates will skyrocket because you're effectively investing into more junior talent on lower packages.
Great. The only thing I would add to that, I think, fantastic points, Dan. And I love the idea of the fact that, like, actually it solves a much bigger problem down the line in the medium to long term. But I think, you know, in terms of getting your boss and your boss's boss and your boss's boss's boss bought in, I think, you know, I've accepted it's our fate at Hatch, and Dan, I'm sure you're much the same, where if you're given a pilot, it's going to be the most difficult brief in the building. And the models do stand up. You know, when you multiply the talent pool, you diversify the talent pool, you're not running out of applicable candidates. But so pick the role that's causing the most challenges, the most headaches through traditional hiring practices, costing the most money, and pilot it with that, because it'll still work. And I think that's a real kind of penny drop moment. So yeah, that's I'm conscious of time, so I'll leave you with that.
Well, I was just about to say, like, guys, it's been such a meaningful conversation. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope everybody else has as well. Definitely comes across just how passionate you both are about the subject and about social value. So just encourage everyone to keep, you know, you can reach out to Xanthi and to Dan on LinkedIn to keep that conversation going. Yeah, thank you so much for joining and appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for piloting, Hazel.
Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.